You wonder why Hitler came to power, why he was such a predominant figure in Germany. There were two big factors as to why. The first one was the Reichstag fire. The Reichstag fire. The Reichstag fire occurred in 1933. Now, what's so significant about this Reichstag fire? Okay, a lot of people will refer to it as the first ever physical false flag that ever occurred in world history. There's some things I'm going to tell you about this so-called false flag. Let me give you a backstory to give you an idea how this may have been set up to intentionally happen. This occurred 1 month after Adolf Hitler was sworn in as the Chancellor of Germany. The National Socialist Party stated that Marinus van der Lubbe, a Dutch council communist, was found near the building and attributed the fire to communist agitators in general. Though in 1933, a German court decided that van der Lubbe had acted alone as he claimed. It was after the fire the Reichstag fire decree was passed. The Nazi Party used the fire as evidence that communists were plotting against the German government. Keep this in mind, ladies and gentlemen, because I'm about to make a corollary comparison here, and when I do, you're going to get a little confused. Communism and socialism, you need to understand, is similar. And the reason why I bring this up, I'm about to show you something that's going to blow your mind. This is the anti-fascist action flag here for 1933. This was the Nationalist Socialist. Nationalist Socialist. I want you to process this for just a second. The social communist that started the fire, yet the flag they would eventually adapt is this flag right here. It is a socialist flag. You're asking yourself, fed up, wait a minute, they're two wings of the same bird, right? Yes, they are. They are two wings of the same bird on the aspect that the Nazi Party was founded on socialist principles. Give me just a second. We're going to take a step back. I'm going to give you an abridged history. Down the road, I will do a full-fledged history. And I'm going to do two things that's going to lead up to this event. And it's very important you need to understand. The Nazi Party may have been founded on deceptive principles. The Nazi Party emerged from the German nationalist, racist, populist Freikorps paramilitary culture, which fought against the communist uprising in post-World War I Germany. The party was created as a means to draw workers away from the communists into Völkisch nationalism. Initially, Nazi political strategy focused on anti-big business, anti-Borges, and anti-capitalist rhetoric, although such aspects were later downplayed in order to gain the support of industry entities. And in the 1930s, the party's focus shifted from anti-Semitic to anti-Marxist themes. Pay attention to what I just referred to. They wanted to get away from Marxist regimes. However, they're basically two different wings of the same bird. This gentleman right here would eventually rise to power. He fought in World War I for the German army. He felt that the Treaty of Versailles essentially screwed over the German people. I'm not going to drag this out anymore. Basically, here's how it's going to go. It was Adolf Hitler that was one of the few people that were admiring this so-called rise of this party after World War I. The entire party felt that the German people, the German country itself, was screwed over by the Treaty of Versailles. The League of Nations was a complete joke, as I mentioned in previous videos. If anything, the Treaty of Versailles created this individual right here. He would rise up in the ranks throughout the many years to come, throughout the 1920s. But another key event occurred around this time frame of the Reichstag fire. By the end of the 1920s, it looked like Germany was starting to show signs. By 1927, it looked like Germany's economy was finally starting to turn around. They had fulfilled their obligations according to the Treaty of Versailles. Things were actually looking good. And then the stock market crash in America occurred in 1929. It had a chain reaction that would carry over into other parts of the world. You had unemployment throughout the entire parts of the world. The impact in Germany became more dire. In just a second, I'm about to show you some photos that depicts what happened in the 1930s. Things were so bad, and I'm telling you, it was bad. One of the problems that they ran into was the fact that the German economy was not equipped for the retraction of cash and capital. Banks struggled to provide for money and credit. In 1931, there were runs on German and Austrian banks and several of them had folded. There is an image, if you have followed me for a long time, that I keep reverting to. Unfortunately, this is the closest depiction I could come, but this gives you an idea. People withdrawing wheelbarrows full of money. Now, why would that happen? Apparently, when things got so bad, hyperinflation occurred. The German economy had crashed. You have people wheeling around wheelbarrows full of money with nothing but German marks just to buy simple things like bread and food and milk and other basic necessities. The crisis was so bad, as many at one point in 1933 of 6 million people were without work. It was terrible. It was the biggest economic crash in world history. It had crippled the German economy because as much as they had recovered from what had happened of Treaty of Versailles, this was what was to come. How does this usher in something of a nightmarish scenario? Give me just a second.
Hitler said that he was the strong man who could solve the economic crisis. At the head of a dynamic party that promised it would destroy Germany's internal enemies and rebuild the country around national unity. And Hitler campaigned in a fresh and original way. In his 1932 Hitler over Germany presidential election campaign, he traveled by aeroplane to 20 cities in 7 days. Though he was to lose the election to President Hindenburg, Hitler had established himself as a credible alternative leader of Germany.
Now I want you to keep this in mind, because despite the fact losing, did he really lose? I'm about to tie this all up here in just a second. Now we go back to the Reichstag fire. Okay? This occurred on February 22nd, a few months after the key election there in Germany. Now keep this in mind. This gentleman was tried and convicted. A communist. Now, how significant a role does this play? 4,000 communists were rounded up that same night. The night after the incident, the Reich Law was passed. Now, how big of an issue this become? When this Reich Law was passed, it disabled civil liberties there in Germany. Here in just a second, I will give you the next critical step. What would happen next would change things almost immediately overnight. It gave the Nazis more seats in power in Germany. They fell short. For Hitler to overcome this, he had to have a 2/3 majority against the communists in Germany. He despised the Communist Party. Then came the Enabling Act. The Parliament passed the Enabling Act of 1933, which gave the cabinet the right to enact laws without the consent of Parliament. In effect, this gave Hitler ultimate dictatorial power. It established him as a totalitarian in his own country. By this very act, it gave the Nazis ultimate power. It ultimately had Nazi Germany established as a dictatorial, totalitarian power. One of the first acts that would be initiated was improvised camps. Following that was concentration camps. He had seduced the National Party to cooperate with him. That was the second mistake. The Reichstag Parliament had essentially voted themselves out of existence, with Hitler as the figurehead and the dictator-in-chief for the country of Germany. Parliament was no longer needed for Hitler to ultimately ensure that no one would be a threat to him from this point forward. He initiated an action to rid any opposition in the country against Adolf Hitler. Trade unions were essentially abolished. Opposition politicians in the country were essentially imprisoned and arrested. This also introduced the implementation of the brown shirts. The brown shirts were essentially Hitler's little small militia to go door to door and make sure no one, and I stress the words no one, was to be opposition to his cause or to his credo. I'll interpret, because I honestly don't want to listen to him. The sixth party day of the movement has come to an end. What appeared like a show of political strength for millions of Germans outside of our ranks, for hundreds of thousands of fighters, it was ultimately more the great personal spiritual meaning of the old fighters and comrades in struggle. Keep this in mind, and perhaps a cross-section of you, despite the forced civility of this review of our party, will return with courageous hearts. These people, to the days in which it was difficult to be a National Socialist. Keep that in mind, folks. National Socialist. Do you understand now what I've been trying to tell you? The National Socialist Party was essentially another version of the same thing he had eliminated. He had used a false flag to instill power. By 1933, he became chancellor and he was the ruler of freaking Germany. And it would become a nightmare scenario for not just Germany, but the whole world. Folks, if you want to see more content like this, please share the video. Thank you.